NBA season canceled. What are the odds?
Yeah.
What are your odds today?
Oh, I'd say it's probably 60-40 right now.
With the NBA season on the verge of being outright cancelled, a revenue problem has risen, which will almost certainly cause the salary cap to decrease for the first time in a decade. Over the past 10 years, the salary cap has only moved in a positive direction, jumping from $58 million at the start of the decade to roughly $109 million this year. But this season, we've experienced two immensely detrimental and unprecedented blows to the cap. First, there was the Daryl Morey controversy with China, which eliminated one of the NBA's biggest markets, and as a result eliminated potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And now, we are currently dealing with the coronavirus pandemic, which is threatening to put an end to the entire NBA season. If the season were to get cancelled, a huge question remains on what would happen to the salary cap. If the NBA decided to just end the season, that would obviously result in a huge loss in revenue. Just think about all the TV revenue lost from airing games, from selling merchandise and concessions, and from ticket sales and parking fees. And to add on top of that, think about all the revenue lost from the even more profitable playoff games. According to Ben Glauber's piece in the Washington Post, a cancelled season could result in at least $1.2 billion lost in revenue for the NBA. And even if the NBA just cancels the regular season and somehow manages to salvage the playoffs, Neil Payne of 538 estimates that the losses could still reach $1 billion. So why is this significant? You might be thinking that NBA owners and players are rich enough to where they can collectively swallow a loss in revenue. However, the complications arise in the fact that the salary cap is directly tied with league revenue. The salary cap is made up of the portion of the NBA's basketball-related income that is dedicated to the players. Basically, this money is divided amongst all 30 teams, and it serves as the amount they can pay their players. So if the NBA is making less basketball-related income, then there's less money to go around for each team, thus forcing the cap to shrink. The cap matters so much because the NBA revolves around it. The cap pretty much determines how NBA teams are allowed to build their rosters, which has a direct impact on the outcome of games being played. Rick Bucher of Bleacher Report estimates that we could see a $15 million decrease in the salary cap if the entire season is cancelled. And even if the regular season is cancelled and the playoffs continue, John Hollinger of The Athletic estimates that we could still see an $8 million decrease. This is a problem for a lot of reasons. The salaries for most NBA players are determined in advance. When a player signs a contract, it details the exact amount of money that they're guaranteed over the course of the contract. For example, Julius Randle, who signed a 3-year, $62 million contract last offseason, should still expect to receive $18.9 million next season, even if the cap does go down by $15 million. This is where things get tricky. That $18.9 million salary was originally set to only take up 16.3% of the cap for the Knicks in the 2020-2021 season. But if the salary cap goes down by $15 million, it will now take up an increased 18.7% of the cap, leaving the Knicks with less spending room than they had previously expected. Overall, because the cap determines how much a team can spend in a single season, this cap decrease is going to bottleneck a lot of teams who recently signed players to long and hefty contracts. I guess the one good thing for teams is that some of their most expensive contracts will scale down with the cap. This is the case for teams that sign players to max extensions that are set to kick in next season. Because max contracts are structured to be worth a percentage of the salary cap, if the cap goes down, these players will be making less money. For example, Ben Simmons signed a max extension last offseason and is set to make about 25% of the salary cap next season. If the cap goes down, his salary will also go down too, since his salary will be 25% of a smaller total. A player set to make 25% of the salary cap in the 2020-2021 season will have their salary go down by roughly $3 to $4 million. And because the raises of a max contract are based off of the first season's value, Simmons will continue to lose out on money for the remainder of his 5-year contract, even if the cap does rebound. With NBA teams having less money to spend, the next most obvious area of concern is free agency, which is where teams do a majority of their spending. Teams will have less money to throw at players, so it's inevitable that almost every free agent will be underpaid, some more severely than others. This is a huge loss for the players in contract years, who have played excellent this season and were on track to receive a huge contract this offseason, such as Fred VanVleet and Bogdan Bogdanovic. However, There could also be a handful of teams who will also take huge L's in free agency. All the teams that previously had cap space to make signings in free agency, but are set to lose that space due to the cap shrinking, fall into this category. For example, the Chicago Bulls, who were projected to have $9 million in cap space this offseason, would now be over the cap if the cap decreased by $15 million. Instead of being able to sign an above-average player in free agency, the Bulls would be restricted to only signing players worth minimum contracts. This cap decrease will also change the landscape of future free agency classes. Players who have player options this offseason will likely opt in because their expected earnings in the current free agency market are far worse than the value of their option. In a previous season, these players would have almost always opted out because the rising value of the cap would have made any new contract that they would have signed more valuable than their current option. As I've mentioned before, max contracts are worth a percentage of the cap, and since the salary cap value in the first season of a max contract determines the value for the entire contract, star players will avoid locking themselves into these bad deals. So the star players that have a player option in their current contract will almost certainly delay their free agency until next season, which will crowd the 2021 free agency class with some better talent. 2021's free agency class already has a handful of big names, most notably Giannis, so that will be very exciting. Luxury tax is another huge issue for teams to consider. If the cap decreases, the luxury tax threshold will go down proportionally too, meaning more teams will either be in the tax or at risk of paying the tax. That means teams might end up cutting players who have non-guaranteed salaries, or teams will be reluctant to assign all of their free agents using bird rights. However, I don't think this will be an issue, as I'm very confident that the NBA might increase the luxury tax threshold or consider lifting it altogether for this upcoming season. The purpose of the luxury tax threshold was meant to keep large market teams from abusing the soft cap salary cap, not to pin down a majority of the NBA in the event of a salary cap decrease. There's no reason to punish NBA teams for something that was completely out of their hands, especially because small market teams will be disproportionately affected by this. So what should the NBA do about this? Personally, I think the NBA should decrease the salary cap gradually, rather than dropping it severely all at once. That'll give NBA teams time to adjust and make intelligent roster moves with adequate foresight. The issue with this solution is that it will put the league in the red for the first few seasons, as more money is allocated to the cap than the league has made in revenue. Another glaring issue is that it will prolong the effects of the decreased cap for more seasons. But it will all be evened out over time, and it saves the league from an outright salary cap disaster. I think the implications of a $15 million salary cap decrease in a single season unfairly leaves players and teams with little flexibility to work around such circumstances.